Good afternoon, guys. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Gilded Aegis of the Glacial Shield podcast, and today I'm going to be discussing with you one of my favorite games, Destiny 2 Beyond Light. The newest expansion, Beyond Light, released in November, and I'm going to first start my discussion off by just giving a brief review of the expansion, some of the positives and negatives about it. Then I'm going to do a current state of Destiny 2 discussion with highlighting some of the concerns from the community and some of their gripes and their grievances and where their hopes are will take the game. I will cap off this discussion by just going into some of my thoughts about the game, where it currently is, and where it can go from here. So, to give a brief recap of this expansion, the newest raid, Deepstone Crypt, launched amongst massive success and love from the community. The new raid gear, the armor weapons are spectacular and some of the best we've ever seen in the series. The loot acquisition to get said gear is unreal, and it actually rewards you for repeated attempts and runs through the raid. The raid exotic rocket launcher, which is an RNG drop, Eyes of Tomorrow, is really fun to use. It's potentially bugged against raid bosses where it does less damage, but it's fun to use. It's really great in Gambit, and it looks awesome. It's beautiful. I have it right here, actually. Let's look at it. This thing is beautiful. It's magnificent looking. It's like Wardcliffe Coil and Gallahorn had a nice little baby. On top of that, the new story is decent. Aramis does seem like she falls a little bit flat on the villain front. We've had other villains in the past like Oryx and even Gaul to some extent were really good villains. But Aramis doesn't quite meet that mark. She's decent, and her lieutenants are really fun to face. But the more important and more fun storyline and fun to learn about is the story about the Exo Stranger. I won't get into details about that, but let me just talk about the acquisition of the darkness subclasses and the abilities and fragments and aspects are actually interwoven into the story, which is spectacular for a player engagement point of view. It might not be the most fun to run through your second and third characters to get their grenades and their aspects, but at least that first loop through is very fun. On top of that, we have a new play space for the moon of Europa, which orbits Jupiter, and this planet is beautiful. The new lost sectors and the new public event style activity is actually really fun to do. There's harder modes for lost sectors, which give you targeted farms for armor pieces, and that's really great. It's actually rewarding for the player to keep engaging with that content to get the gear they want. Some of the gripes about this DLC, though, when it's compared to the bigwigs and the whales like Taken King and Forsaken, you know, the game is currently lacking new PvP maps and Gambit maps. There isn't quite enough like gear to farm and chase in this, though, in my opinion, it is of a higher quality. And same with the exotic weapons and armor. We've only received one new strike and another redone strike. And other than that, the seasonal model for this season, the season of the hunt, is actually, in my opinion, a little lackluster. The loop is essentially a lost sector meets a public event, and it's very simple. And on top of that, the gear that you can earn from this season, the weaponry, isn't the most fun to get. The SMG and the grenade launcher are decent if you like those things, but other than those two weapon archetypes, the other three aren't that strong, and it's unfortunate because, there is a loot problem in the game, but some of the gear in this DLC and season, it does have good perks, they look cool, and they're fun to use. And that's one of the main things for an expansion and for Destiny as a whole is, does the weapon feel fun to shoot? Does it feel fun to move and shoot and go pew pew with your gun? A lot of the time in this case, yes, but there just needs to be more for players to sink their teeth through, especially those hardcore players. Okay, so with those things in mind, let's go over the current state of Destiny 2. Like I said before, I was talking about the season. Now, the seasonal model from Bungie, we've actually been seeing that in the works since Shadowkeep launched last October. Now, when it launched then, we had Season of Undying, which was okay. The seasonal content there was actually fairly fun. It was a unique instance. There were several different mechanics and encounters that you'd have to actually play through in order to get to the final boss. And the gear wasn't that great, and it wasn't that unique looking. It was just Curse of Osiris gear with leaves. But if you go into Season of Dawn and Season of the Worthy, and from what I've heard, Season of Arrivals, the gear actually looked better. It was fun to use. It was actually very strong in endgame content, and the at least the encounter and the instance that was created for Season of Dawn, the Sundial, was fun to do, and the gear you earned from that was great. But I think the issue that is plaguing the seasonal model is just the fact that it doesn't reward hardcore players. This drip feed style content, it induces almost a FOMO effect where if you don't play week to week, then you're going to feel like you're really missing out. And in actuality, there's not enough substance there to satiate those hardcore players to keep them engaging with the content week in, week out, which is unfortunate. I think a lot of the problems with Destiny currently are linked to the fact that it is free to play for some of the content, which means that for the most part, they can't monetize, or at least they won't monetize, new Crucible maps, new Gambit maps, new Strike content, like Strike-specific loot, or even more Strikes. If they can't monetize it, what we've seen from the past almost year and a half is that they just won't make new Strikes. They won't make a whole lot of new Crucible maps, and they really haven't made a Gambit map since Season of the Drifter back in middle of 2019. It's unfortunate. Another unfortunate thing is the fact that we don't have a hard mode raid, and we really haven't had a hard mode raid since Prestige Leviathan. And that's unfortunate, especially since Prestige Leviathan was actually fairly lackluster and boring. All it did was make your targets more spongier, and there was slightly tweaked mechanics. When I think hard mode, I think of hard mode Wrath of the Machine, with drastically different mechanics and new adds and new monsters and things to fight and shoot, and more stress, and also better and more unique looking loot and weapon ornaments, or not weapon ornaments, sorry, armor ornaments. Your character was rewarded with more loot and better looking loot in some instances if you played the harder content. If you look at Vault of Glass and Crota's End, if you played the hard modes, then you would have elemental primaries. They've since not done elemental primaries the same way, but that would be a really cool thing to have, say, an Arc Fatebringer, but in the primary slot. I think hard modes are really needed for Destiny 2 right now. It would give players just that challenge that they've been craving for raid content really since Last Wish. Once Last Wish was beaten and you brought the level cap, it was a beaten raid. It was definitely a lot harder than it was during contest mode or during its first day launch. The fact that the raid took multiple hours and a day or more in some cases, 2402, hashtag Datto. But yeah, the raid, when they're first launched, feels very difficult. But when you get down to the details, once you have the right gear, the right level, the skill, the understanding the mechanics, the raids are then beaten. At least a contest modifier being added in the same or similar manner that it currently has during day one raid races, that would feel that sense of difficulty there. Because right now when I hop into Deep Stone Crypt, the enemies are like paper. I look at them and they die. I feel more of a sense of urgency and stress from ads and Gambit than I do in Deep Stone Crypt, which is unfortunate because it's supposed to be endgame content, pinnacle content, difficult content. When I think difficult raids, I think of Wrath of the Machine hard mode. I think of King's Fall hard mode. Those two raids stick out as quality endgame difficult content, which rewarded your time. Maybe more so in Wrath of the Machine's case than King's Fall, but the point stands. I think if Destiny 2 launched at the very minimum a contest modifier, or at least a difficulty slider similar to, say, Nightfalls, where you could have Grandmaster raids, Master raids, Legendary raids, those things to have on top of maybe more Spoils of War from weapon crates, or Masterwork gear dropping, or Masterworking materials, that would be a very strong incentive and push for players to use that content more. I find players are actually just really wanting to have a challenge, and Destiny feels very simple right now, which is unfortunate. The game is very fun, and people want to play the game, but the fact that the content isn't quite there, the reasons to run aren't quite there. There's some things that are working with Destiny, but there's also some things that are working against Destiny, which is really unfortunate because the game has unlimited potential, in my opinion. Unlimited, unmatched. It feels amazing to shoot and move. The content is fun. Raids are unique to, like, raids in looter shooters are something that was designed, in my opinion, by Destiny, and they've just been honing and perfecting that craft. And it's clear. You look at the earlier raids, mechanics were simple, but the fact they were new to shooters, they were difficult. The puzzling aspect, it was new. When you played Vault of Glass, you weren't really used to, having to run around with an Aegis or some kind of relic or something like that to be tanky for your team to block it, to do puzzles during bosses. It was all unique at the game in 2014, and it still is some of the most quality content in the game. Even raids that aren't the best, people don't consider Eater of Worlds the best raid, or people consider Crota's End more of a strike than a raid. Those raids are still fun to play. The loot is decent, more so for Crota's End, because the loot in the raid layers in Destiny 2 were very, very questionable and, in a lot of cases, hated. Overall, the game needs more endgame content, and that'll keep the game running longer and played for longer. Another thing I touched on earlier is just this reinvigoration of strikes, and on the whole, I think a reinvigoration of those core playlists needs to happen. Those strikes, Crucible, and Gambit need some TLC, a little bit of tender love and care, a little bit of hugs and kisses. You know what I mean? That content really is missing content. You know, there's lots of strikes to do, lots of Gambit maps, lots of Crucible maps, but there's not a lot of loot. They need new strikes, new Crucible maps. We haven't seen a new Crucible map for a number of months now, and I think it would be just so cool to have one in Europa, maybe in a Braytech facility, maybe in the Morning Star, or one in space, just something to capitalize on that content that Bungie has. To have one in space on, like, the in the Deep Stone Crypt, I think that'd be so spectacular. It would look beautiful. Some of the coolest stuff is just Destiny skyboxes. When you're playing through Deep Stone Crypt and you're in space doing the jumping puzzle or the simple platforming, it's amazing. It's beautiful. It's untapped potential. The last thing that I'd like to touch on for the current state of Destiny 2 is just Trials of Osiris. Now, we haven't had Trials of Osiris in what feels like a month and a half at this point. It was taken to the game before Beyond Light to let players have more time to engage with Beyond Light new content, but also hopefully, in my opinion, to have it be maybe put back in the oven for a few minutes to have some time for Bungie to actually maybe make it a little bit better and tweak it somewhat. We know we're getting weaponry added into the flawless loot chest after 7 wins on Mercury at the Lighthouse. So hopefully that content ends up actually being worth it for players to engage with. However, we haven't seen Trials come back into the game yet. It was supposed to come back last week, and then it was supposed to come back the week before. But there's been bugs and glitches and game exploits that players have been using for benefits in, say, Crucible, and just it's cheating. And Bungie hasn't put Trials of Osiris back into the game yet. It makes sense because you don't want to have your pinnacle endgame PvP mode be launched again in a state where it's exploited by bugs and cheats and cheaters. At the same time, those hardcore PvP players like Frostbolt and, Lupo if he plays it, or Mtashed, ZK Mushroom, those players there, they love to run Trials. And that Trials of Osiris just isn't there yet. My big fear is I hope that this doesn't happen. I hope that because the content has been away for so long, I hope that it doesn't, drive players away and eventually they just don't care because it took too long. Too long, too bad. So, where can the game go from here? I think in its current state, Bungie as a developer and interacting with the community have been seeing significant, steady improvements. There's been so many comments and feedback on Reddit, on the Bungie forums about Destiny 2 and just where they're moving forward right now. And I really, really think that Bungie is proving time and time again that they're listening, that they're acknowledging our commentary and our feedback and our concerns and questions. There's 2 instances that come to mind right now about bugs and just the fact that they're actually disabling buggy exotic weapons or commenting on bugs in the game and addressing the quick patches. Day 1, the Shadebinder melee, the Penumbral Blast, the range was way too far. It was about 22 meters, and it was really just a big pain in the butt in Crucible. On top of that, you had I think they're called cold snap grenades. Cold snap grenades were a big problem in Crucible too because you could toss them and then the grenade would go around a corner and freeze the target, and not only freeze them, but freeze them for, I believe, around 4 to 5 seconds. Too long. And it not really sucks to get frozen in Crucible, but it's fun to do the freezing. So they tweaked the melee, and they tweaked this grenade, and Shadebinder no longer felt completely busted. Another bug that was actually discovered by somebody and then, produced and developed a YouTube video by Lucky for YouTube, uh, the Warlock Rift bug in Crucible. So essentially, the Warlock Rift, when utilized in tandem with the Vesper of Radius, as well as sliding off a ledge, this would lead to you not using your Rift charge, and you could also deal damage with the Rift, and when paired with a quick top tree Dawnblade melee, you would get a quick and easy kill. So they disabled Vesper of Radius almost within a day of seeing that video, which was spectacular because if that's in the game for too long, it's going to lead to some toxicity and some negativity in the game, which they don't need that in the state it's in right now. That, and there was also an issue that prevented Trials from coming back, which was the Titan Behemoth invisibility glitch. Essentially, the Titan would use their melee, and they would go off the radar, but they'd still be able to move around the game, just the player wouldn't see them, like the enemies wouldn't see them. Two good things that followed Bungie quickly and efficiently addressing bugs and feedback, which led to them, delaying Trials, which sucks, but it's better for the player health. And I think players will see that once Trials comes back. It's like, you know what, it's better that the game didn't launch with this game mode because, there's a lot of bugs, a lot of unknowns with stasis and this new ability that's actually surrounding the Crucible. And I really hope, as a final item, that Bungie listens to our commentary and our hopes for having harder difficulties for raids. It would not only give us reasons to run through Last Wish and Garden of Salvation again, but would give us the challenge that we need and that we desperately want for Deepstone Crypt. Like I said earlier, the ads in the game, in the raid, they're very simple, and the mechanics, once you understand them, are also simple. With those things in mind, guys, I really thank you for your time today. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you have a great day. See you later.